Hi, and thanks for watching. Today we're going to make some beginner Pysanka. If you haven't already done your dyes, you'll want to do this ahead of time, only because you are using a cup of boiling water and you'll need time for it to cool down before you actually dip your egg into it so it doesn't actually cook your egg. Now, I've purchased a powdered dye and it comes in a little packet, so you use about half the packet in the boiling water. And then you would also add a half a tablespoon of vinegar to this. One important thing to note that if you make orange, do not use the vinegar. There are some basic tools that you will need for this process, one of which is of course a candle, and you'll need some manual kiskas if you do not have electric ones. Now the manual kiskas are basically like a little wooden dowel with a copper funnel fed through it, which is what you heat over the candle. A pencil is also useful, as well as a measuring tape, some beeswax of your choice. I use the sheets just because I personally find it easier. And of course, you'll want your egg. Your egg should be clean, dry, and at room temperature. Now, before you start any egg process, you want to make sure that your hands are also fully dry without any lotion or anything on them, because that will affect on how the dye attaches to the egg itself. The first thing that we're going to want to do is plot out our lines. So with Pysanka, we work from light to dark. So the first thing we want to do is actually put wax or draw lines on everything that we want to stay white, because we have a white egg. So the first line that we're going to draw is from the top of the egg to the bottom of the egg and back up again. So basically what we're doing is forming a full circle around the long way of the egg. Now you can do this by either using a measuring tape as a guide. I've used elastics. I've also drawn dots and just connected the dots, or used medical tape if you want to ensure a straight line. You can also just do it freehand. Once you've done the line from top to bottom and back up again, you'll turn the egg a quarter of the way around and do that again. So what you've done at this point is now broken the egg down into 4 segments. You'll also want to then do one line around the middle of the egg. So essentially now you're dividing the egg in half. There are 4 quarters on the top and 4 quarters on the bottom. We're now going to take each of those segments and divide them in half. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to start at the middle point in the middle of the egg and then divide each segment in a pie-shaped wedge to the middle line that goes around the long way of the egg. So you'll see for each of these, I'm starting at the middle, marking off where about the halfway point is of that segment on the middle of the egg, and drawing a straight line. Now, one thing I should mention is that if you do make a mistake with your pencil when you're plotting out your lines for the egg, is resist that urge to use the eraser. What the eraser will do is it will create a film on the eggshell itself, which means that the dye will not adhere to the shell. All you really need to do is just redraw your line. When you are taking the wax off the egg or putting it in the dye itself, a lot of the times those pencil lines that aren't supposed to be there will disappear. Now that we've traced all of our lines and essentially divided the egg into 16 pie-shaped wedges, we're actually going to retrace those lines with our beeswax. So the first thing that we need to do is warm up our kiska. What we do is we will hold the kiska, the copper part, over the flame so it gets warm. Once it gets warm for the first time, it will stay warmer for longer. So we'll warm it over the candle and we'll put the wax in the funnel itself. Once the beeswax starts melting, then we will trace our lines from the kiska onto the egg itself. Now, I think one of the most challenging things to learn when you first start doing Pysanka is to do a straight line with the wax. I find it easier if you can keep a long, steady flow line rather than kind of tracing it little scratches at a time. The longer you can go in a continuous line, the smoother and straighter your line will be. So if your wax isn't flowing as smoothly or as nicely as you think it should, I always found it helpful to have like a little small like bread and butter plate that I could tap the kiska on just to kind of clear it out a little bit. Or if you have a really thin wire, you can always just poke it right through to help make things flow a bit more smoothly. At this point, you might want to pause the video until all your lines are waxed and are ready for the next step. Now the next step is actually to draw a little almond shape or an eye-shaped piece in the narrow half of each pie or each wedge of pie. So I would say just to make sure that the lines are not touching the wax lines themselves. And once you have done all 16, so 8 on each side, then we're again going to stop and going to cover those with wax. I always do find this beginning part of plotting out your lines, making the wax go on top of the lines. This is always the longest part of whatever you want to keep white. Again, with Pysanka, what we're doing is we're starting from light and going to dark. And the reason we do that is obviously because we can put darker dyes over lighter ones, whereas we can't do it in the reverse. So anything that you want to stay white does really take the longest because these are the initial pattern lines of the egg. So once you've penciled in your little almond shapes in each wedge, this is roughly what it should look like. At this point, I did switch to the electric Kiska, and what I'm doing is I'm outlining each one of those little almond shapes in the pie wedges. I am leaving the middle part unwaxed though, as this will be dyed a different color. So now to give you time to catch up, once you have outlined all 16 of your little almond shapes, you can pause the video until we're ready for the next step. So we're all done with the white now, and this is what it should look like. Now that we're done waxing everything that we want to remain white, we're going to take the egg and put it in our first color, which is usually yellow. I've chosen a golden yellow for this, so just put it on your spoon and put it in the yellow bath. It'll sit in this bath probably about 10 minutes or so. Once it's done in the yellow bath, you'll want to pick it up with a paper towel and just make sure that you blot off any excess dye and make sure that the egg itself is completely dry before proceeding to the next step of adding more wax. So now that we've put our egg through the yellow bath, what we're going to do is wax everything we want to remain yellow. So the first thing we're going to do is take our Kiska and we're going to start near the center of the egg at the bottom of the little almond shape and just draw a little line from the tip of the almond shape about halfway up the almond shape. So just a little straight line straight up the middle on all 16 of them. With these, you don't really need to use a pencil line first because the lines or the details are much smaller than the initial long straight lines that we needed. You don't really need to plan out ahead of time, and you can just freehand this. So once you've done that, you can now draw a little wax line from the top of your almond to the outer edge of your pie shape, to the wide portion of it. Do it on each almond, and then on that line you can also put two little arrows. They could be facing up, they could be facing down. It's whatever your preference is. So now is a good time to pause the video and continue on when you're ready. The next color bath we're going to put the egg in is our orange. You can just leave it in the orange till it's the shade you like. And again, when you take it out of the orange dye, just make sure that it is blotted dry and completely dry before you start waxing the next color. From this point on, the dyeing and waxing process really does go fairly quickly. Our next step is to put little dots on the ends of those arrows that we drew on the top of the little almonds. So really all you're doing is, you could just touch the Kiska to make a little tiny dot. You could, actually make a circle, make a bigger dot. You could make an X. You can basically do whatever you want. And again, with the colors themselves, these are just the colors I've chosen. You could choose any colors you like. It's just really a matter of making sure that you start from the lightest color and work to the darkest. And as I continue with my little dots, feel free to pause the video until we're ready for the next step. The next color we're going to be using is green. So we're not going to dip the entire egg in green. What we're going to do, because normally there is just a little bit of green in these eggs, is I'm going to take a Q-tip and I'm going to put a dot of dye at the very tip of the line that we drew from the top of our almond. I'm going to do that on each one of them, and then I'm just going to let it sit for a minute, pat it dry, and then flip the egg over and do the same on the other side. Unless you're doing a full egg in green, this is probably the most efficient way just to do a small area of a specific color. When I'm done applying the green and it is perfectly dry, I am again going to use my Kiska and apply the wax to the green in a little circle, just like you did with the orange. And now's a good time to pause the video until you're ready for the next step. Once you're done waxing the green dots, we're going to put it into our red. I've chosen more of a dusty rose color for this, and you can let it sit in this dye until it's the color that you want. And now we're ready for our last stage of wax. So at this stage, what we're going to do is just fill in all those little almond shapes so we preserve the red dye. And again, now is a good time to pause the video until you're ready for the next step. And this is what it should look like roughly before you put it into your last dye. I've chosen to use my last color as a midnight blue. You could use any color you want. You could use a darker red, possibly even a brown would look nice as well. I'm going for more muted kind of tones and shades, so I chose like a midnight blue. When this is out of the dye, then what you want to make sure is that the egg is dry, completely dry, before you start melting off the wax, which is our second to last step. To make sure my egg is completely dry before I start melting off the wax, I've made this little board with some nails in it just to help it dry for at least, I don't know, half an hour or so. You could also use an upside down egg carton. And now it's time to melt the wax off to see the results of your beautiful handiwork. What you would need to do is just hold it to the side of the flame of the candle, not right on top because you don't want scorch marks on your beauty, and just wait until the wax melts off and wipe it away as it melts. There are other methods such as putting it in the oven. In the end, I wound up changing to my method that I would normally use is by using my hairdryer on a medium-low setting, and it just melts the wax off beautifully. Now that your wax is all melted off, you can step back and admire your beautiful Pysanka. There are many ways you could finish this. You could leave it raw, you could varnish it, you could blow out the eggs so all the insides come out, you could leave it whole and just leave the insides, well, inside. If you do decide to leave the insides in, then I do recommend just rotating it upside down about every 6 months. After a few years, the insides will actually dry out, so there won't be a problem anymore. I hope you had fun today, and I hope you'll give this a try, and thank you so much for joining us.